gentlemen and distinguished guests, imagine, if you will, that this simple wooden square is Parliament Hill. Parliament Hill in the spring. No snow, no scandal, just birds singing, grass growing. Springtime is here. And imagine, if you will, that the sun is shining down on these 5 famous women. Emily Murphy, Nellie McClung, Irene Parleby, Henrietta Edwards, and Louise McKinney. Let your imaginary forces work, and suppose these women might observe and speak of a world 90 years hence from when women became legally recognized persons in Canada. Let us further picture 3 women of this present day and what they might say. And admit me chorus of this history. Ask of you your humble patience, pray, gently to hear, kindly to judge our play.
Tell me something, girl. Are you happy in the modern world?
Gracious me, is that young woman deranged? Singing loud to herself and pressed like that?
Poor creature. She's destitute too. Look at her trousers, they're all in holes.
I was getting used to seeing young women in trousers, but look at this, not like this deranged woman.
It seems that women are struggling these days as well.
La 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 la. Where are they? I'm starving. La 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 la.
I knew it. Homeless, hungry, and hallucinating.
I don't think so. Look at that contraption about her ears.
Well, she probably stole that from the telephone company on Spark Street. So she's a thief shoplifting too.
I've seen those before on men and women. Some sort of wireless. I think she's listening to a radio broadcast.
Betsy, I am so sorry. Do you know the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Krista Freeland? Well, she paid us a surprise visit.
So, it's Payday Friday. You get extra time for lunch, don't you?
Well, no, she's my new boss and I had to stay, and I wanted to show Cassie around Parliament Hill.
She works in the government. Sounds important.
This Minister of Foreign Affairs is a woman?
And they allow women to dress like that in the workplace?
Like undressed. She is practically naked.
Please, style aside. This sounds interesting. Let's listen in.
Cassie, this is my friend Betsy.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
All right, let's go get
something to eat.
Who are they?
I'm so glad you asked. These statues are the famous 5, the women I was telling you about.
Right. You said they were famous for something to do with women's rights. Why are they drinking tea? Why tea?
Why, they're celebrating their victory. They didn't drink brandy in those days.
Goodness me, we did not drink brandy, but a cup of tea, well.
What was their victory?
It's actually on that plaque that Nellie McClung's holding. They arranged for women to be persons, and that was in 1929.
Persons. You mean women were not considered persons here before 1929?
Exactly. Women were not considered persons according to Canadian law, so they could not hold a seat in the Senate.
This person's stomach is growling. Let's talk about this over some fries.
Betsy, come back. Cassie's new to Canada, and I want her to know country. All right, now listen. Would you believe that the gentlemen of the Supreme Court turned them down when they first appealed?
You have read that right, girls. The Supreme Court men in Canada still didn't think that women were persons. But we didn't stop there, could we?
Now, after that setback, they went back to England to get a ruling. And the Englishmen, at least those in the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, said they had to be considered persons.
Why England? Wasn't Canada a sovereign country by then?
Well, not exactly. We were a dominion, but still a part of the British Empire. You see, we were in a separate country until 1949, and up until 1982, we cannot change our own constitution. So we were still British subjects in 1929, not Canadian.
Wow. But at least they had the right to go to England. The Privy Council, you said?
Yes, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council of the British government. That's who made the decision. Still a bunch of men, but at least they were getting the image that women cannot be held down forever.
I'll say, remember Emily Pankhurst? She fought for women's suffrage in England. She and her groups, they broke windows and interrupted speeches and went to jail for their cause. That was great help to us.
And after we were declared persons, we got them to appoint a woman senator.
Yes, most people wanted me, myself included, wanted me to be appointed the first woman senator and get that distinction. Prime Minister Borden would have done it, but of course in 1913 Mackenzie King was Prime Minister, a Liberal, and he found a Liberal woman, Karen Wilson, to be the first senator. Only a few months later, in 1930, the Conservative R.B. Bennett defeated King, and he would most certainly have appointed me.
Our first senator was Corinne Wilson, a longtime Liberal from Montreal, appointed by Prime Minister Mackenzie King.
Hey, I went to a school called Corinne Wilson. Now I know why they named it after her. She was a senator. Cool.
I might have had a school named after me.
Prime Minister Mackenzie King appointed Corinne Wilson in 1930, in February. He had no issues with women being in Parliament, and of course, he chose a Liberal. Did you know, by that time she had 8 children?
Wow, a superwoman.
It wasn't so unusual those days. Lots of women had big families. No birth control, you know.
Oh, we had our own ways of limiting our families. It was our mothers who wore themselves out having children. We had other interests.
I wonder if they know why it took all 5 of us to get this thing done. I would have done it myself, of course, but I couldn't. I needed you all.
So how come it took 5 women to make this case? Couldn't one of them have done it?
I suppose they needed each other for support, to stand up against the men.
Gracious me, they didn't read their history right. Young women should be taught about the person's case.
Well, yes and no. I read that Emily found a little-known clause that stated any 5 citizens acting as a unit had the right to petition the Supreme Court for clarification on a constitutional point.
That was clever of her to find that clause.
It certainly was.
Yes, Emily was a magistrate, you see, appointed to judge prostitutes and juvenile women. In fact, she was the first magistrate of the British Empire.
Correct. The first in the mighty British Empire on which the sun never set, and I didn't get to the Senate.
All 5 were from Alberta, out west. You haven't been there yet, but it was a progressive place.
From the little I've read so far, these women also had some very funny ideas.
Funny ideas indeed. We were protecting the country.
Well, we don't agree with some of their other ideas, but they did get us to be considered persons.
Did women get the vote then? Women got the vote in the States almost 100 years ago, in presidential elections in 1920. It was a long struggle in my country, too.
Yes, we had the vote in the federal elections. Prime Minister Gordon gave the vote in 1917 to women who had men in the war efforts. Husbands, sons, fathers, and I think brothers. And that was because he was afraid he'd lose the vote. But before then, women already had the vote in some of the provinces.
Of course women had the vote. Nellie, you were instrumental in that.
Remember how we in Manitoba fought the men to let us vote too? It was a great fight.
I remember, Nellie, when you played Premier Roblin on stage in Winnipeg, and you had a full parliament of women, and the men came in with a wheelbarrow full of petitions asking for the vote for men. And you said, politics are unsettle our men, and unsettled men means unsettled bills, means broken vows, and means divorce. And you also said that men are meant for things higher and holier than the vote. Good men shrink from the vote like from the plague. And the modesty of our men, that we revere very much, forbids us from giving them the vote. The place of the man is on the farm. I loved the way you turned the argument for not voting for, not giving women the vote. You put men in their place.
Yes, that was fun. Remember how Premier Roblin used to say, nice women don't even want to vote? Well, Premier Roblin was re-elected that year, but his government fell due to a corruption scandal, and the Liberals came in. Just 1 year after our mock parliament, the women of Manitoba got the vote, the first in Canada. And Saskatchewan and Alberta were only months behind.
And remember when you were heckled by that man who said when women got the vote in Colorado, they proceeded to stuff the ballot box with fake votes. And then he asked, can the lady explain that?
And I said, you can't expect women to live all their lives with men without picking up some of their little ways.
You are good at repartee, Nellie.
And that vote did not apply to Native women and the men either. They did not get the vote until 1960 without losing their Indian status.
Ooh, tell us about the infamous stuff. You said they had other ideas we don't agree with?
Yes. They believed in eugenics. Or at least Emily Murphy did. She was convinced that selective breeding of humans would solve social problems like alcoholism and crime, which she also linked to mental deficiencies. Anyhow, in Alberta, that led to the Sexual Sterilization Act in 1928. And then over the next 44 years, they sterilized almost 4,800 individuals. They thought that this would protect the gene pool of Canada, and the act was only repealed in 1972.
There was eugenics in the States too. Forced sterilization was pretty widespread.
That is so gross.
You see, they should have kept it up. We would have a far better population by now. Crime, alcoholism, drug addiction, all these are still with us today. With forced population control, it could have been wiped out a long time ago.
You don't know that. And anyway, Canada has lots of immigrants from other countries now.
Indeed, there are lots of people from all over the world living here in Canada now. And they have all types of skin colors too. We certainly did not agree to that.
And didn't they agree that immigration from places where people had different skin colors, big issue in the US?
No, indeed. They wanted Canada to remain for the whites.
It indeed would have been a more stable country if they had stuck to our ideas.
Yeah, well, at least there's better education for women now. Remember, I wasn't allowed to go to art school because I was a woman. How stupid our men were in those days.
And I wanted to go into medicine.
These women fought hard for women's rights, access to education, property rights after marriage, and
This is really interesting. But honestly, I need something to eat. And I want a nice cold beer.
What was their take on alcohol?
oh, well, that was a big thing.
Did not. They did not allow. Did they tolerate young women drinking in the middle of the day?
Disgraceful.
Well, that was a big thing. They fought for prohibition, and to some extent they won. There was prohibition across most of Canada in 1917. Quebec signed on in 1919. However, they realized it was leading to crime, so they rescinded it. And Ontario was the last holdout. They turned to government regulation in 1927, and that's when we got the LCBO.
I still think they didn't try hard enough to control crime, and they should have kept prohibition.
I wish we could talk to them right now and ask them what they think of our new marijuana laws. Which reminds me, I've got a big fat joint right here in my bag. Want to share? I'll pass. I bet we can make them turn in their graves.
We have to get back to work.
Well, I don't.
What is that terrible smell?
I believe it's what they call weed. Marijuana, smelly stuff. I warned them in my book, The Black Candle, about its dangers, but would they listen? I wish I could talk to them. I would give them a piece of my mind.
Well, young girls smoking tobacco in the daytime is awful anyway. And with this smelly stuff, I hear they feel a bit like as if they've been drinking alcohol.
Yeah, and after we in the Women's Christian Temperance Union worked so hard to educate people about alcohol.
We're a lot more free than they were, I think, in a lot of ways. I definitely think it's a better world.
Absolutely. You're right, Alice.
I mean, we still have a ton of problems, but at least women can get in there and try to solve them. There are women in parliament, in legislatures, and civil society helps women too. The Me Too movement, for example, is bringing an old problem into public discussion.
Now, what on earth do they mean this is me too?
Well, they are taking men to task over sexually assaulting women.
Really? That was amazingly brave of them.
Yes, and they are finding success. Some success so far.
A as I always say, when women get themselves into the workforce and are competing with the men,
I wouldn't go there, Emily. You are now cast in bronze, and you have no say in the matter.
Well, we don't agree with some of their other ideas, but they did get us the vote, and we are now considered persons. Hey, it's such a beautiful spring day.
Yeah.
Why don't we go to the market and get a cold cut and some salad? We can set up right here beside these brave women of yesterday.
Sounds good. Okay.
Hey, I think I just saw such a move.
Oh dear Betsy, I think we better get you some
You go ahead. I think I'll finish this.
Okay, well, we'll be at Nick Astor's as usual. Don't be too long.
Because of the 5 of you, I am happy in the modern world. You deserve a pat on the back. Thanks.